Hello and welcome to the 16th episode of Thrive, where wellbeing converges, your source for expert insights and advice on all things mental health and wellbeing. As the year winds down, we've actually got our Christmas special, or our festive season special, sorry, I should rephrase, for you today, where we're going to look at, how many of us feel stretched thin, and we're going to explore why intentional rest and reflection is vital for mental health and how taking time to pause can set you up for a stronger, healthier start to the new year. And to discover all these simple ways and strategies and insights, we actually have one of our great team here, Coco Nkrumah. How are you going today?
I'm doing good, Curtis. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, no problem. Look, I'm placed here at Converge as a training consultant, counselor, and mediator. I specialize in delivering training for teams, groups, senior leaders, managers, middle management, the whole range around promoting health and wellbeing, essentially in a training capacity. So that looks like workshops, online training, consultation. I also do work as a counsellor in the workplace, so supporting people with their well-being and managing stress, and also conflict resolution. So I'm a workplace mediator, so resolving conflict between two or more individuals, or interpersonal conflict, or challenging communication style in some capacity. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. Lots of strings to your bow there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant, awesome. So I think our listeners are going to get a lot from this session, and I'm sure many of them may actually already know you, which is awesome. So,
Yes.
as you've worked with a lot of our clients, but yeah, so let's jump straight into our first question then. So, why is it so important to intentionally pause at the end of the year, both personally and professionally?
Like, that's a good question. There's a lot of ways to answer that. Perhaps if we start with the personally, I
Mhm.
like to say it can allow the body to catch up to where what's happened and what's transgressed throughout the year. Um, Look, my mindset when we talk about rest and well-being is sort of usually coming from the lenses from the work that I do, mainly managing stress, managing high volume of work, managing conflict in some way, shape, or form. So when we talk about resting and taking time out, I'm going to use that lens, and that's the context in which we're taking rest from. So even if we have meaningful work that we thrive in, work that we enjoy, there's an emotional engagement in that, right? And that takes energy. So I think from that standpoint, it's important to intentionally take some time to allow our bodies to start to settle. One thing that I know, when people do take time out of the workplace, whether it's through stress, or whether it's annual leave, or what have you, they do note that once that self-reflection starts to kick in, or making sense of their recent period of work, or a recent role that they've been newly walked into, or new responsibilities that they had taken on before leaving for some leave outside of the workplace, and taking some time at the end of the year, what have you. They need some time for the body and the nervous system to start to settle down, right? To relax. And I don't know if you've had that experience of booking a trip overseas, right? And then it feels like it almost takes us almost a week before we really start to settle. And that allows us to have a self-reflective process, right? And make sense of the challenges that we faced, what particular works or projects meant for us. Then that's a building ground for creating goals moving forward. So the act itself is something that can be very important to do. And then the question is, well, when you do that, what conditions are you creating to have that self-reflection, both personally and professionally? I know that I mentioned that we'll start with the personal, but they're sort of one in the same thing. Once we get
Yeah.
clear on how the current recent world of work, team we're working with, leadership style, new ways of working, how that sort of relates to our felt sense of value and identity to the work. Once we've had an opportunity to create the conditions to reflect on that, that's when we can set meaningful goals moving forward. So I guess it's both helpful from a reflective standpoint, from a nervous system regulation standpoint, so bringing that nervous system back to more of a resting state, and reflection. It serves both purposes, professionally and personally, of where we want to move forward. So
Yeah, definitely. I suppose, like, if you look at that in, like, sort of in reality, I guess, is like, I don't know, a lot of people, obviously, as they come into sort of the festive season, it's been a long year, lots and lots of work, and they're sort of waiting for that break, that festive break where they might get a week or two off. Sort of what would be your recommendations then for people to actually, like, some actionable sort of strategies, I guess, for people to be able to go, okay, I've just had a crazy December. I'm now broken up for, say, a week or 2 weeks or whatever. You know, some people might have a bit longer or a bit shorter, just to be able to actually rest and reflect, I guess. And you know, is it a case of sort of digital detoxing or things like that to be able to actually have meaningful rest when they actually do have a break?
Okay, yep. So your connection broke up a little bit there, but I think I
Oh,
got the last end
apologies.
of your last end of your question was what, what are some strategies that we can do to have a meaningful rest on a break? Is that right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, well, look, I think it is, it's a matter of balancing, the, I guess, the foundations that breed well-being. And I like to look at it into two ways. One is having some time to be by oneself and have that self-reflection, and creating the conditions to allow that the body to come back to that resting state, but also having some cornerstones of well-being in place also. So, if we think about what we generally do when we take time out, we may fill that with things, travel and social engagement and engagements with friends and family, which are great things to do. But sometimes we can be packed to the rafters and we don't have time to be intentional on that downtime and how we have a framework around that. If I look at the grieving process and how people experience grief, because you've done some work in that sort of area. It's important to understand that and I'll use that in this context. I'll draw a connection there, but it's for a purpose.
Yep.
People can grieve by themselves and also grieve in groups, and that they're both important for us to do. Sometimes when we've done some work with people who are experiencing grief, one of the common questions is how long is this going to take, and how do I sort of, the feeling of anguish, overwhelm, it's intrinsically uncomfortable. It's not meant to be a comfortable experience because you're making sense of a new reality, right? And people want to get through that as quickly as possible while honoring whatever they're grieving, right? But there's two conditions in which we find is helpful to do that. One is with others and having a space to talk about what's going on, and a lot of that's embedded in the culture of how different cultures experience grief, or how that represents in culture. And the other one is alone. When we're alone, all of those emotions start to come up, and if we're prepared for them, that's great. Sometimes we're not prepared for them, but time alone allows that process, just because we don't have any interaction or stimulus if we're managing that by ourselves. The same is true when we're trying to go through that reflective process. So how do we do that when we talk about making sense of a period of work, whether it was a great, engaging, great experience, or was a challenging, stressful experience? It's managing the time spent alone and managing the time engaging with others and resources outside of our body in a meaningful way. So I like to talk about having a balance between downtime where we can be with our thoughts, whether that's having some time to go for a walk, practice meditation, something to that effect, some time to generally reflect, maybe journaling, getting your ideas on paper, perhaps listening to some calming or relaxing sort of ambient music, anything that creates the conditions for the mind to start to turn inwards without stimulation. And obviously being off of the socials and that sort of thing can be
Put the
helpful in
phone
managing
down.
that. Yeah, that can be helpful. And it's not an intellectual thing. It's just letting the mind and the body sit and allow whatever whatever comes up to come up. That may be, I handled that conversation really well with that client 3 months ago. Just a thought that might show up for you. Wow, I'm really proud of myself that I actually did that. I would love to build on those skills moving forward in the next year. Or it might be, that situation that I went through, I didn't realize how much of an impact it had on me. I didn't realize how much when we, experienced that challenge in that project. I didn't realize just how much I was taking on responsibility for where that project was going, and maybe I compromised my professional or personal boundaries there. Just as an example, these are sort of some composite statements we see in consultation with people. So that's the
Yeah.
time spent alone. The other thing is, what framework can we have when we're engaging with friends, family, because it's a festive time of year at the end of the year, and
Mhm.
we want to be out and about doing
Lots of
things.
social engagement.
Lots of social engagement. I love to refer people back to the World Health Organization's WHO 5 questionnaire. So that's a free
Mhm.
information. You go and see that, Google that online, and it asks you questions of a 2 week period. There's a method to their madness to start to see what areas of well-being you have sort of, covered in your life. And they ask questions. That question, it's a self-reporting questionnaire, asks you questions around a 2 week period. In the last 2 weeks, I've felt active and vigorous, or I've felt jovial and in good spirits. And it's starting to see what sort of conditions are there in place that creates those conditions from
Mhm.
a biopsychosocial aspect. So if you think about that questionnaire, and those of you who are listening, you can go and Google that and fill that in. It's asking to see, do you have experiences where you can experience joy and be in good spirits? Commonly, people report that they're in the company of others when they do those things, feeling active and vigorous. It's not asking us to do, 200 push-ups a day, or run half day marathon, or become a gym junkie or anything like that. It's just asking, was there an experience in the last 2 weeks where you felt active and vigorous? Might have been playing with the kids in the backyard, might have been taking the dog for a walk on that summer's afternoon. So that's a great framework to think about of how can I get those needs met over the next 2 weeks? How can I get higher on that process whilst I have some downtime? So that would be the two processes I would sort of think about. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's one of those things as well that we've talked about this on our last sort of festive special last year with Tabitha. Is like a lot of people, like the positive side of having those social engagements and whatnot. They can be draining, but they also can put a pep in your step as well. So no, I think you covered that beautifully. But
Mm.
I guess for my next question was during a time that glorifies busyness, it's almost synonymous with being busy, being active, and whatnot. Why do you think rest and reflection often gets overlooked or even undervalued around this time of year?
Yeah, well, look, I think it's because, it is around the time of the year that it is. It is a busy time of year. That look, we can answer that on a cultural level, on a sort of, on a level of consumerism, a whole range of things. But I think essentially, it's to value time, to be, you know, with ourselves, and to honor that downtime. So I think what it might be, looking at is the the assumption or the idea that sort of being busy, being out there is valuable, and it fulfills a variety of needs, which is true. But having time to create that space and those conditions is also just as valuable. So I think it's around valuing what it means to have individual time, and what have you. I always like to talk about the slow living movement. The
Mm.
slow living movement is an idea that it's a particular way of experiencing the world, which is intentionally living a simple life intentionally to create space to find value in things. And you can take that idea of slow living slowly, living doesn't mean you have to live like a hermit or very minimal, but it means that you intentionally create space in your life to have moments of mindfulness, moments of connection with your environment. You can take that to how you experience travel, how you experience family engagements at that time of year. Instead of jam packing your travel experiences to this Airbnb, that tour, this, that, and you can't just take a breath, it can be helpful. Sort of the whole thing of quality versus quantity, right? You want to
Yeah, yeah,
experience a new culture and a new city if you are traveling, or you are spending time with friends and family, and really immerse yourself in those little sort of unscripted adventures throughout a city where you don't know where you're going, and you're sort of going and having some fun along the way. You don't need to do 20 things over a 2 week period. You might only need to do six. and really embed yourself there. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think just
I
to
think so.
value that
Yeah.
downtime would be, yeah, helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think, it takes me back to one of the episodes. 'Cause I did an interview with Jade Nicholson, obviously in our C-suite team, and she's probably the busiest person I've ever met. She's constantly on the go, and she sort of, and I remember asking her like, how does she value downtime? And it was almost like her downtime is her trip home. So when she sits on the tram and she does her journaling and whatnot, she has that. That's her 10 minutes to rest, pause, reflect before going into the next
Mm,
sort of busy period of the day. So no, I think you answered that, yeah, beautifully, where it's, value that time that you have, and then, make sure that you're putting it in there and you're giving yourself enough breathing space. I think that's perfect.
mm.
But as we move into sort of the reflection and mindset side of this conversation, what are some practical ways people can reflect on the past year without getting caught up in guilt or regret? So, regretting how maybe a project went, or guilt that maybe their work-life balance wasn't as perfect as they hoped, those sorts of things.
Yeah, well, I think first would be to name that guilt and regret, because we have to name when the reflection's coming up, what is it that's showing up for us? I like the Socratic questioning method. I think it sounds very fancy, but it's not that fancy. A lot of children, toddlers do this. You know, Mum, why is the sky blue? Why does why does water fall from the sky? What is even that, right? Children have
Yeah.
this really interesting curiosity, natural curiosity, asking three whys. You know, and you don't have to be your own psychologist or psychotherapist to do this. It's a natural inquiry. So if, let's say, there is a feeling of shame or guilt around what I did or I didn't do in a professional capacity, you can ask yourself three whys. Well, why am I feeling that? And why may that be? And why may that be? That gives you permission to ask the why without getting overwhelmed, right? Without
Mm-hmm.
trying to solve the whole issue or the problem, because whenever you're contemplating these things, there are other people who make decisions who are generally involved, because you're not working as an island. So there are things that are outside of your control there. And that can be the springboard to get to a core belief or a core assumption. Sometimes, particularly with people I've noticed who are high performing or work well under pressure, they have a sense of identity associated with their role, which allows them to do that. So that sense of identity creates sometimes a polarizing expectation. If a project didn't go the way that they wanted it to go, sometimes they take it upon themselves that is my failing in some way, and that's even more embellished if they're leading a team. Okay, so it's important to acknowledge that, to ask those three whys, to note some of the emotion of what you're feeling there. Another thing is to ask, what emotional tone is behind what I'm thinking? So what is the emotion I'm feeling while I'm thinking this thing? For us to think about whether it is strategically, or think about lessons learned, or think about what I did well, or we have to acknowledge sort of what lens we're coming from, what's the
Yeah.
emotional tone there. And it's sort of like the difference between a debrief and a supervision in a professional setting. You can be your own debriefer mentally, and then you can be your own supervisor. They use those terms in counseling, psychotherapy, and other helping professions, right? One is to have a conversation that creates the conditions to have an emotionally cathartic experience, so to express an emotion in a safe and healthy way, and also to unpack any to move off the back of a situation where there's emotional volatility, right? So it's a container for that. The supervision is very similar to that, but we also have a self-reflective, perhaps even strengths-based approach to what's going on. So some self-reflection, and sometimes those two things look different. One's sort of that from the emotional embodiment side of things, and the other one, may have more of a reflection and feedback process there too. So I'm waffling on a bit there, but taking those principles on board can be very helpful, because without naming the shame or guilt or what have you, it can be challenging to to have that reflection there. Yeah.
No, definitely, definitely. And I think, yeah, it's very, Very good way of putting it. And I apologize, listeners. My phone did just have a random alarm. So apologies, Coco.
No, I didn't hear that
No,
at all.
all good. Okay, brilliant. Good. Hopefully no one else did. But no, I think that's very well put, is, having that time to sort of, I think sometimes it's good that, like, we might have guilt or we might have regret, but then acknowledging it and then knowing how we can then reflect on that, and maybe even put a positive spin on it, or understand where we could have done better and things like that. And it's always good for self-improvement too. Yeah.
Yeah, spot on. And if we ask ourselves the three whys, you're generally going to be met with a core expectation of what we should have done or what we shouldn't have done. Then you can look at that. Is that realistic, right? Is that helpful? Is that serving me, right? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely brilliant. So how can reflection help us build self-awareness and emotional resilience heading into a new year? So when we're looking at those goals, how can we reflect to build better self-awareness and better emotional resilience?
Yeah, well, I guess I think it can get, we can base our goals off of our needs, right? What we find value in, what we are responsive to in our working environment. I mentioned before, people who are high performing and work well under pressure have a deep sense of identity associated with their role. So sometimes when I'm working with people, I ask, what do you find what do you find of value in your role, and how does that relate to who you are as a person? From there, we can start to look at goals from not just an operational perspective, but from a value-driven perspective. And there's an area of, I guess, negotiation there in our own mind and what that looks like, right? Because it's something that we actually can do. Something that's interesting, if you ask someone, I like to ask people, explain to me what you do in your work as if I were at a barbecue and I'm just, I have no idea of what you do, and just explain it to me in simple terms, in
Mm,
layman terms. What's the work that you do, and um you know what's the core of your role, and what do you find important? And
mm,
generally, they'll a lot of people will lead with either what they think is the most important thing of their role, okay, or what they find, value in. I said, I'm a well-being consultant at the start of our session. I'm also a counselor and mediator. So well-being and consulting, and providing information and sharing information around well-being is a core of what I think I do, and this comes forefront of my mind. So I guess when we talk about resilience, and aligning that with goals, the self-reflective process helps us to get clear on our own whys of why we do what we do. And then we can
mm,
build goals around that. Also in a conflict setting, so when people are experiencing some interpersonal challenge or even just high levels of stress, generally when people are really struggling and they're digging deep in their levels of resilience, the things that show up in their mind, as to the why they need to take the next step, or the perseverance to do that, is their value of why they're doing what they're doing. So, if it's someone in education, we commonly see in a mediation capacity, I want to get through this challenge or hard period of work or resolve this issue with my colleague because I'm here for the children. I'm here for the kids. I'm been in this role for 10 years, and the reason I show up every day is to improve the education of the next generation. So they look like mission statements. They look like those values that we can align our goals with, sort of like an organization has a, mission statement and all that thing, and then we have goals off the back of that. And a great testament to that is the book Man's Search for Meaning, the work that Viktor Frankl did with logotherapy, and
mm.
how getting a deep sense of meaning can build reservoirs of resilience, in our environment. So
Yeah, wow. No, brilliantly put. Awesome. And do you think rest looks different for everyone? So obviously your perception of rest is probably different to my perception of rest. And if so, how can we identify what truly recharges us? So what steps can we take to understand what is rest to me, and what rest do I need versus what rest that you need, and the rest that you will sort of take, if that makes any sense.
yeah, no, yeah, look at there. There's a core, like for instance, if three individuals have three different sleeping patterns, right? And they may require some nuances. Some person can operate at 8 hours, another person can operate at 7 hours. Then that's variable, but we know that as a generalization, you're going to need a baseline of 5 hours, or anything before that's going to compromise your well-being. That's across the board. So there are some baseline things that it's going to look similar for everyone. So that's definitely going to look like some time to you know take some time, general downtime or leisure time outside of that environment as a core, as a core thing to think about, and having some psychological distance from an environment is helpful. Outside of that, I like to talk about just listening to your body. Some of you might, what rest looks like, as you mentioned, with the commute on the train. Some of you might find that for rest, movement is active movement, or even mindful movement is a core element of your rest, to process information and think about your thoughts. Some people might really benefit from a long walk to reflect, make sense, and also relieve, soothe their nervous system, as opposed to someone else who might benefit from journaling and getting out those ideas. Or someone might benefit from lengthy conversations with people that they find they have share close values with. So, for basic core pillars of well-being, it's generally across the board: diet, sleep hygiene, so getting enough sleep, relative to you, but we know that we need a core certain amount of hours as a generalization. General movement or activity, that's the sort of things that are across the board. And some space from that environment to facilitate the sort of the decompression sort of thing. But also listening to yourself, listen to what your needs are. So a great thing to ask yourself is, even if we go back to that WHO 5 questionnaire, if you're engaging in some of those activities, after having done this thing, how do I feel? Was this a rewarding experience now I have done that thing? And it's not a matter of, you know, did I do 30 push-ups, or did I run 5Ks, or did I get an extrinsic result, extrinsic motivator? So did I get, if I invited 7 people to a dinner party, did all 7 people come? It's more of, after having engaged in that activity, what is the emotional feeling that I'm feeling? Am I feeling grounded? Am I feeling a sense of connection? Am I feeling optimistic? Am I feeling that after that long run, I'm feeling more grounded and my mood seems a bit more stable, as opposed to spikes of anxiety as before I started that long run? So there will be some things I would just, thought experiments, if you will, to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's one of them ones where, like, you kind of think, you have some people, like, I think an example that makes me think of is like introverts and extroverts, where, some people will go to a dinner party and feel like so elated and happy and get a lot of value out of going to a dinner party. But then you get some people who are like, my social batteries are drained, I am knackered, and they didn't get the same sort of restful value. So I guess it's like, do you think it's one of the things where it's do what you enjoy? If going to a dinner party and being around loads of people is what you consider rest and where you feel recharged, versus some people who might just want to sit and watch a movie or read a book or something like that, and that's their form of rest. Do you think it's like what your body says, I feel rested by, and what you enjoy, I guess?
Yeah, look, and it's a bit of both. If you ask that question, after having done this thing, how do I feel? And you
Yeah.
might even do a bit of an audit here. You can break it down into behavior, physical sensation, emotional tone, a thought that you're having. So after having gone to that dinner party, or after having done that physical activity, am I more talkative? Am I more lively? Am I feeling lighter in my body? What are the type of thoughts I'm having? You can just do a quick audit. And that also can be, you can aid that in the experimentation, right? If you're trying a new thing, you might go to a workshop, or you might go to a painting class or a dancing class or something, and you can ask yourself that question: after having done this thing, how do I feel? Then that way you can either let your body, your emotional tone, your thought, your behavior be your guide. So it's sort of a feedback process with yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. No, I think that's really awesome. Yeah, and that's a great way to put it as well. I think that's a very easy, practical step to implement. 100%. Yeah, but what does true rest look like? So beyond just setting New Year's resolutions, so if it's like, I want better work-life balance, a lot of people can say that, but then do they actually implement that kind of thing? So I guess, what do you sort of consider as true rest?
Okay, are we talking about rest or goal setting? So it sounds like there's a bit of,
Um, I guess it's like sort of like a lot of people may put goals in that to try and make them feel better. I'll
mm,
rephrase from rest and more so well-being, I guess. So,
mm,
you might be working really hard and your well-being takes a back seat. So, a lot of people might set goals for the new year's, like I'm going to quit smoking, or I'm going to maybe abstain from alcohol for a while, or I'm going to get a better work-life balance, or I'm going to take up running, or those sorts of things. So those personal goals. Um, what does true well-being look like beyond just setting those New Year's resolutions? Is it those micro sort of objectives that are easy attainable, or is it the big objectives? Like I want to run a marathon, that kind of thing.
yeah, great question. I think ultimately
Mm.
taking action to those goals, it can be helpful. And um, again, if we go back to any habit, it's getting clear on, you know, what the goal is and what the objective is, because there can be two different things. If the goal is, if there is some, if it is running a marathon, we're going to have to break that down into manageable bite-sized pieces, right? Um, but we have to be, clear on if the goal is well-being, as I mentioned before, after having done this thing, how how do I feel, right? Um, if the let's talk about physical exercise because it's something physical, tangible we can talk about. If the goal is performance, then the objectives, they're going to look a certain way, and
Mm.
I guess the motivation might be an extrinsic motivator, which is motivator outside of our body, or
Yeah.
something that we can see from our environment, whether that is feedback from someone else, remuneration, a prize, or even feedback that I ran five Ks today. That's extrinsic to us. The reality of human beings, we all operate off intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. So if someone's doing that, helping their child do homework, the nurturing parental urge is an intrinsic motivator. The
Mm.
result on the test that the child's working towards, extrinsic motivator. So the reality of human beings is we have a bit of both there. But I
Yeah.
guess if the goal is well-being, then it's finding the value in the action itself. So if it is to read more, or to become more active, or drink more water, become more healthy, really dialing those habits back down to bite-sized pieces and finding the value in them. We're fulfilling well-being by doing that. We've already attained at some level the results by engaging in the habit, and we can start to build on that because I'm assuming goals are going to be sort of for a long, period of time. That's outside of very clear performance or sort of uh, outcome-driven type of processes. But if it is relating to well-being, just knowing that the action is the goal fulfilled itself. So if it is around becoming more active, then even if it is playing with a dog in the backyard or what have you, or walking around the block a couple of times a week, finding value in those habits. And I also always refer people to the book Atomic Habits is a great one for this one. I don't know if you've heard of that book before, but a
Mm.
lot of people find that very helpful because that's when we start to align our identity with the things that we're doing. So if I'm
Yeah.
an active person, if I identify myself as in 2026, I want to be more active, right? As we have that's a value driven sort of goal. I want to become more active. That's still ambiguous. What does active even mean, right? If we have that orientation, we can then look at, well, what does active mean for me? Because I want to be more active. When I'm active, I feel good. I feel good about myself. What does that look like? It may look like taking the stairs instead of the elevator. It might look like,
Mm.
drinking more water instead of coffee throughout my week, or sorry, for health. It may be, getting off one stop or train stop early and then walking to work, and getting some Ks in. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to sign up for the gym membership on the 1st of Jan 2026 and commit to, a period of intense training, but getting clear on those values is going to inform on those objectives. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. And then I guess, how can our listeners encourage others to pause and rest? So, I feel like a lot of us, you might see your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, a friend, your partner and whatnot, who you might just think they just need, they're so inundated, they're so, busy minded and whatnot. How can we encourage those people in our lives to take a moment and rest and reflect?
Look, I think from what I see people respond well to is leading by example.
Mm,
And I see this in training when we're delivering training workshops or webinars. There might be, a group in a team, and one person's, let's just talk about mindfulness meditation, for instance. Someone says, "Hey, I used Insight Time. I used that app, and we had that high when we went through that restructure. We had that high volume of work. We onboarded that new client, and it was very stressful while we were doing that. I used this app every morning. I drove into the workplace, sat 5 minutes in my car, put the meditation on, and it just helped me ground myself before moving into my first meeting." That goes a long way for another person in the workplace to go, "Well, Greg mentioned that, and I've been working with Greg for 6 months, and if it works for him, look, I might try it." As opposed to a big fancy facilitator coming in from delivering a webinar and telling you all the things that you should be doing, right? So
yeah.
that's the essence of a testimonial. The essence of a testimonial is someone's sharing their experience that is going to get you over the line to change your behavior. So if we're talking about that with friends, family, the first thing that I would say is start to implement some more being approach in your own life. It doesn't have to be overhauling your life, but if you can lead by example, say, "Hey, look, this works well for me," and offer that invitation and inquiry to think about, might be something you might want to think about, that can be helpful too. Therapy is a great example of that. A lot of people come to therapy because friend or family members either noticed that there's been something going on for them and brought that to their attention. It might be a partner that's brought that something to one's attention, and people go, "Well, maybe I need to make change now." Or someone else has referred them and said, "Hey, look, I tried therapy 6 months ago and it really helped me." It might be just something to think about. And if you have a level of respect, rapport, camaraderie, or connection with that person, again, the odds of you thinking about changing your behavior start to increase. So it's the essence of a testimonial. How can I be a walking testimonial to my friends and family? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Yeah, because it's one of those things. I'm actually going to use that because my partner is very, very busy all the time. And I feel like we both are. And I think, I think that's an awesome way of doing it, is just like trying to get them on board as well,
Mm.
and taking that time and taking that rest. No, that's awesome. And I guess now it's for my final question, Coco. Honestly, it's been awesome. You've been a brilliant guest, and we a lot to take away from there. Really, really appreciate your time. But yeah, finally, how does taking time to pause, overall, sorry, I'll rephrase. How does taking time to pause help us with our well-being, our relationship, and our performance?
Well, look, it allows us to make sense of our environment, right? And
Mm,
it allows us, I think we have a lot of times we know what we need to do. We have an innate wisdom and we're the authority on our lives, right? So if we
mm,
take, well, the authority on what's important and meaningful to us, and if we know that we should be doing something, we usually know in the back of our mind we should, right? Um,
mm,
the mind is a sense-making machine. It loves to make sense, draw connections, comparisons, think about things, make sense of our world. Allow the mind to do that, and you create the conditions for the mind to do that through that self-reflection process. So if we create the conditions, to have that space, be aware when we might have a feeling of shame around something, we allow the mind to make sense and reflect and think about how we can move forward. Yeah,
yeah, brilliant. Awesome. Thank you so much, Coco.
no
Thank
problem.
you so much
Pleasure.
for your time. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners will get a lot out of that. But if you'd like to, be able to have a chat with Coco and the team, we've got a lot of expert consultants here at the Converge. And if we are your workplace wellbeing provider, we have our employee counselling stream, which will help you with things like sleep, addictive behaviours, depression, anxiety, anything to do with general well-being, it's an awesome tool to use. And you don't have to be a crisis point. You can actually access this service whenever, you know, if you just want to chat or if you just want to be proactive about your well-being. It's an awesome tool to use. And we also have our nutrition support stream. So they're the two that I'm going to spotlight on this episode. You know, you can get help with your diet and things like that, especially going into the new year where you're setting those goals. But yeah, thank you again, Coco, for joining us. And we'll see you again next time for our 17th episode of Thrive.
Thank you, Curtis. Pleasure to be here.